The latest event in the Stop the Steal craze is a Capitol riot. I'm sure you all saw that a couple days ago. Trump has divided with Pence as well as a bunch of other Republicans. People on both sides, political pundits, are talking about the Capitol riot, comparing it to BLM, figuring out what should be done next, and I'm here to talk about it. So let's first go over the Capitol riot. Um, I guess everyone should have seen that, but there was a Trump rally uh, where he's talking about Stop the Steal, and basically that crowd goes over to the Capitol building and for some reason are able to overload the security there, get into the Capitol building. They broke windows, they went into offices, took pictures, some of them stole some things, uh, didn't completely like, I don't think there was any arson. Um, there were reports of pipe bombs, and I think there were pipe bombs found in RNC and DNC, I think. Yep. See, this is why I have my computer here. I could search up things real quick. Pipe bomb found and destroyed at RNC. And DNC is just evacuated, so I guess there wasn't one at the DNC. But yeah, so pipe bombs, they stormed the Capitol. Uh, it's a whole thing. And I think to figure out why this happened here, we should go back to the start of Stop the Steal and how it's evolved all the way up until now. So, Stop the Steal really started before the election. Um, Trump, or I guess it all starts with coronavirus. Because of COVID, a lot of people don't want to go and vote in person, obviously. Um, and for that reason, mail-in voting was used by a lot of people to turn in their ballots. And Trump was against this because he thought it would be bad for him if people were allowed to vote by mail. Generally, Republicans do better when there's less voter turnout, and Democrats generally do better when there's more voter turnout. So I guess in Trump's head, he was like, vote by mail will increase turnout if we only had in person. Probably right on that. And that will hurt my re-election chances. I think that's what was going through his head. And probably right about that. Vote by mail helps Democrats generally. So for that reason, he was casting doubt on it. Democrats generally were encouraging people to vote by mail. You heard it in Obama's DNC speech. He was like, vote early, vote by mail, etc. And for that reason, vote by mail became a political issue, which is generally how it works. It helps one side, doesn't help the other. And then they make their justifications after. They really just don't like it because it helps them or doesn't help them, or they like it because it helps them or doesn't help them. That's usually how these things work with Washington politics. So now vote by mail is a political issue. And Trump tries to make it harder to vote by mail. Democrats are trying to call him out for that. The normal political news cycle goes on all the way until the election day between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and a bunch of other elections, of course, but that was the main one we were watching. And before the election, it was predicted that Donald Trump would have what a lot of people call the red mirage because in-person votes get counted sooner. Obviously, because Trump was saying go out and vote in person, not vote by mail. And Biden and Democrats was saying, go ahead, vote by mail. Don't expose yourself to the coronavirus. So obviously, that would mean Democrats have the large majority of mail-in ballots, and Republicans have the large majority of in-person votes. So for that reason, the in-person votes that are counted on election day, we see those first. And so that's exactly what happened. Donald Trump came out to a decent lead, and then the mail-in votes came, and then Joe Biden essentially erased the lead and got a lead himself and won the election. So here we have an already political issue, vote by mail, switching who's in the lead to win the election from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. So this is just powder cake, obviously. um, and it was expected to happen. If you looked at who was voting by mail and not, you would know that that was just probably going to happen. But a lot of people didn't expect that, especially with what Trump was saying and how he and Barr and etc. other people were saying vote by mail is a fraud. It's a fraud, okay? It's a tremendous fraud, everybody. Something like that. So, election won by Joe Biden, but Trump then decides to not concede. And anytime the big representative of a party says something controversial, everyone under them has to decide if they're going to toe the line or do some kind of principled stand. And as usually happens, most people fell in line. So a lot of people didn't go full stop the steal, but a lot of people did. As soon as Biden had states declared for him, it was, oh, look at this video on Twitter that shows something suspicious. There was hundreds of those, and all these different allegations come out, and etc. And most Republicans towed the line to some extent. So usually the defense is, I'm just asking questions when you're interacting with these conspiracy theory short Twitter videos that are alleging election stealing. Which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with just asking questions unless you really don't want to get to the answer. So some Republicans went that way. Some Republicans went the way of, wait and see. There might be something to these Twitter videos. There might not be. We'll see. And then eventually the electors decide. And some Republicans just kind of kept silent because they didn't want to have a blemish of stop the steal on the record years on. They also didn't want to face the wrath of Trump. And I think a couple Republicans came out against him as well. So, in response to specifically the second of those, stop the steal varieties, I guess you could say, there's the people that really believe it and, point to, a Twitter video and, say Dominion voting machines and it was stolen. There were, packets of ballots just shipped in, all fake. Those people, I think are just ridiculous. But then there are the people that were saying, the votes don't actually decide the election. The Electoral College does. And to anyone that doesn't know about faithless electors, you're probably like, what did you just say? Because I thought those were the same things. And that is not the case. Our country, all the citizens vote in the Electoral College, but only from that do the electors, the actual electors, get a recommendation that, oh, you should vote the same way as your state did for the president. So essentially, the American people, when we vote, it's only a recommendation to these electors, and these electors choose who the president is. Crazy, I know. And the good thing is, most of the time, this does not differ. Most of the time, the electors, actually, almost all the time, the electors will just vote the same way as their state. So it hasn't really come up as a problem before. But the basic idea is, if something comes out, like what if the person dies, or starts gets convicted by the FBI of something terrible, or something crazy happens in between the election and the electoral college vote, the idea, which I still don't think this is good, but the idea is, if something crazy happens between the people's vote and the electoral college vote, the electors can vote differently. And this kind of made a little bit of sense when it took a long time to transport information of, if something crazy did happen to a president. Like, what if even in the 1800s the president died before election day, and then most people casted their votes to that person thinking they were still alive? Well, then the electors can come in and say, all the people that thought they were voting for that person who died, the electors are going to cast the vote for their VP. Hopefully that makes sense. Like, for example, in the 1800s, let's say Biden was running and Kamala Harris is his VP, but Biden dies on November 1st. But that information can't travel fast enough for people to change their votes to Kamala Harris instead of Joe Biden. So then the electors would say, okay, we'll vote for Kamala Harris in our electoral college vote. Obviously, because the people voting for Biden didn't know he was dead at that point. But in today's age, when we have information so fast, this is just ridiculous that we still have this system. Anyways, that's faithless electors. And the people claiming, oh, it's not really decided until the electors vote, that's technically true, because of just the way I laid it out. But I wish there was consistency in those people that, would call an election the day of people voting in the past, and now all of a sudden you say it's not decided until the electors vote. I get that most of the time, or all the times before, the opponent has conceded before the electoral college vote, but still, it just feels like not a consistent standard when people were saying that. Anyways, moving on. Eventually, the electoral college did get decided and vote for Biden and not go against their state voters' wishes. And all the various claims made by Trump or other people were figured out in court. I think the record in court cases about votes are 49 losses to 1 win for Trump or people related to Trump trying to, prove election fraud. So, and even in like these 50 cases, it's really only alleging something crazy like 12 votes. And the margin is thousands for who won Georgia, for example. So, and he needs to overturn like 3 states. So, really, there's nothing there. It's been decided in court. And, like, you had your day in court, essentially. If you want to claim election fraud, that's fine. If you don't want to concede, fine. But what do you do then? You bring your case up to court. You see if you can prove the election fraud you're alleging. And that's exactly what happened, except they never really proved anything. Even in the one case they won, I think that was a procedural thing. And even if they won more cases, they wouldn't have been able to overturn enough votes to win. So the whole thing's crazy. And here's another point that I was thinking about recently is I haven't looked at all but like 2 of those court cases, and there's 50 of them about. Now, if someone was a Stop the Steal person and came up to me and wanted to question me on my knowledge of these court cases, they could probably make me look like a fool. Because they know everything about these cases. And on the surface, that might look like they are more right than me because they know more about the cases. And that would leave someone to believe like, oh, Stop the Steal is right. And even that's how I sometimes kind of think. For example, like, I usually think the more knowledgeable person uh, is, like, the person that knows more things is the one that has the right political stance. And I really thought about this because how am I so sure that there wasn't election fraud if I haven't looked into all the court cases and all the claims made by Trump and the people around him? Like, how can I be so sure, essentially, if I haven't validated that everything he said is false? And here's why. Um, Essentially, it's trust and sources, because I looked into a couple claims of election fraud, and all of them turned out to just be bogus. And so, if I look at a couple, I'm not going to bother looking at all 50 if I'm just getting bogus claim after bogus claim. Like, if Donald Trump says 100 things, and then the first 7 he says are lies, I'm not going to bother looking into the other 93. I'm just going to assume that they're lies. And that's essentially how I feel about this Stop the Steal stuff. Is so many things are being claimed that, no average person is going to be able to look into all this stuff. I'm not. And I'm not even the average political person. I look at stuff a lot more than the average person. So, like, how do you move forward if you're the average person not being able to look into all these cases? And the answer is, you trust some authority figure, or you look into a couple. And if you look into a couple and they turn out to be false, then, boom, there you go. Because, like, essentially the source, by putting out false claims in a row, has lost your trust to assume truthfulness in their later claims, essentially. Or you could go by some authority figure and say, I'm not going to look into, Trump's claims of Stop the Steal. I'm going to, listen to the people who look into it a lot. And in that case, you would, defer to court cases, because people on a jury are the most knowledgeable about a case, from an unbiased position. Obviously, the lawyers on both sides know a lot about it, but they're not unbiased in the case. And by and large, the juries that are looking into his claims, again, like 49-1, 49 losses, like 1 win, like, there's really nothing there. Anyway, this is a long way to say, like, Stop the Steal just really has nothing to it. And in every spot along the way, it's been a moving of the goalpost, which is a logical fallacy. It's been like, the election was stolen, was the original claim, and we're gonna prove it, and the election isn't decided yet. And the reasons were, the Electoral College hasn't voted yet, and we're alleging all this funny stuff happened. And then the funny stuff happens, or the funny stuff gets tried in court, and they lose in court, and the electors vote. And then the goalpost just moves to, wait until January 6th, and we still haven't lost yet. Moving the goalpost is when you say, you give a reason for something, and then you change the reason after. Or you say why you don't believe something, and then you change that reason after. So the people that said, oh, the election isn't decided because the electors haven't voted yet, and then the electors vote, and then they say the election isn't decided because of whatever, they've changed the reason. That's moving the goalpost, and that's a sign of, you're not being a genuine political person. So I see a lot of that happening, and it's just really sad to see. So, and Biden won by like 7 million votes. Like, It's not really even close. Biden won the Electoral College the same way that Trump won the Electoral College in 2016, and Trump called that a landslide. So I guess that means he thinks Biden won in a landslide this time. Okay, that's the overview of Stop the Steal, unless I'm forgetting anything. Oh, so those people, like the one example I'm gonna give, because I'll listen to him to get the conservative perspective, is Ben Shapiro. He was one of those people alleging the election isn't decided until the electors vote. Well, ever since the electors voted, he hasn't said a single thing about Stop the Steal. He's just remained completely quiet. He's hiding. And, the only reason I can think of is because if he comes out and says the election is decided because the electors voted, which is the standard he originally said, he would get a lot of flack from the Trump part of the Republican Party. And if he doesn't say that, he's going to be a complete hypocrite. So he's just remained silent on it, which isn't really much better. All right. So Stop the Steal. This all, like all the goalpost moving, kept on going and kept on going all the way up until January 6th, which was just 2 days ago, and we all know what happened then. And basically, what was going on before the riot is Congress essentially has the job of counting the Electoral College vote, the electors voting. It's not meant to be something that they can actually like contest. It's like someone hands you 5 carrots and you're supposed to just count them, and you say there's 4. Like, that's not your job. The Congress, their job is just to count the votes that were cast, not, say whether those votes that were cast were right or wrong. But nevertheless, senators and House Republicans and other people were saying, this is fraudulent and we're going to contest it even though that's not supposed to be our job, potentially not even constitutional. We're going to contest the votes and not acknowledge the electoral vote, electoral college vote. And just prior to that, Donald Trump had been having this rally in DC. He had, let me search it up here to get the exact vote, or sorry, I'm mixing up my words, the exact words. Trying to see. All I'm getting is secondary news sources okay. Here's the tweet. So on January 6th, Donald Trump is going to have this rally to, encourage, essentially, use the bully pulpit of Trump's people to get more Republicans to contest this counting of the Electoral College vote on January 6th. And said, big protest in DC on January 6th. Be there, will be wild. All right. So that's what Trump says. He goes to this rally, he talks. A bunch of members of his family talk at this rally. Rudy Giuliani's like, we have to be strong. We have to show these Republicans that they need to contest the election. And not long after this rally ends, they head over to the Capitol building. And we all know what happens next. And this is crazy because I think, like, already there are so many people claiming Trump has nothing to do with this, but he was saying be there and be wild. Then he has the rally, he talks at it, his family members talk at it, and directly after the rally, they go over to the Capitol building and ransack it. I feel like that sequence of events is just too much for any BS reason you want to give, why it's not Trump's fault. Like, would you say the same thing if it was the other side, though? If Joe Biden said, be at DC on January 6th, be there, be wild, and then he talked to a rally and a bunch of other people that, Kamala Harris, a bunch of other people close to him talked to at that rally. And then directly after, they walk right over to the Capitol building and ransack it. Like, if Joe Biden did that, I would be criticizing it just the same. And I think the people who are supporters of Trump or Republicans in general have to be just as consistent and say, look, this guy obviously had a direct effect, or he was obviously a direct cause for why those people went over to the Capitol building. And all the people, like, for example, I'm just gonna, use Ben Shapiro as an example here, who's been silent about Stop the Steal and just let Trump go and do his thing and Republicans go and do their thing and try and avoid themselves the trouble of, being called a hypocrite or being called out by other Republicans. It's also on you because this man's been alleging some crazy stuff for so long and you just kept quiet about it, and then the Capitol building gets ransacked is the end result. And of course, a lot of people came out against the violence after it happened, which we'll talk about next. That's the next thing to talk about. But it's like, if you see someone with a bottle of alcohol and a rag, and then they put the rag in the bottle of alcohol, this is how like a Molotov works, and then they light the rag, and then they throw the Molotov over, and then it hits the ground, and it starts a fire. And you say, oh, the fire is bad. But listen, if you gave them the bottle, the rag, and the lighter, you really contributed to that. And that's how I view these people that are just silent on this Stop the Steal stuff and all the various things Donald Trump does to cause violence, like saying, be there, be wild. If you're silent on that, you're basically, you're just a little two-faced with it, because you're saying you denounce violence, but you're not calling it out when Donald Trump is like laying the groundwork or putting wood on the fire to start that violence. It just seems like you're coming in and Monday quarterbacking and saying, oh, violence is bad, but not actually trying to stop it. All right. So, now, what happens after this violence? Well, to their somewhat credit, a lot of different Republicans came out against it, and that's great. And this was essentially like not the first battle, but the biggest battle of the Republican Civil War since Donald Trump in a long while, or maybe ever. And there's one specific tweet that I just want to show you here. So Trump, Pence tweet, Jan 6. Okay. Let's see if we can find what he said. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones. Something, something, something. All right. So, Donald Trump and Mike Pence are the president and vice president, and Pence has been one of the most loyal people to Donald Trump. Anytime you're trying to get Mike Pence to, say Donald Trump has done something wrong, he always just deflects it. Talks about a Democrat. Mike Pence, up until like a couple days ago, he wouldn't say a single thing bad about Donald Trump ever. Very loyal vice president. But because he wasn't willing to contest the election results, which, by the way, even if they contested it, which they ended up doing, Republicans in Congress, like, it still makes no difference. You're still not going to get anywhere with it. You're essentially refusing to count the votes, and then the Democrats in the House are going to be like, no, we're going to count the votes, and then they're counted, and boom. Like, it doesn't even accomplish anything if you do this crazy, theater in Congress where you're contesting the election. Anyway, Mike Pence wasn't about it. Donald Trump voraciously called him out on Twitter. And boom, there's the rift. And I think to understand what's important about this is to know the history of Donald Trump and Mike Pence. So Donald Trump in the Republican primary in 2016 was causing big waves. He was getting a lot of popularity among the voters, but the Republican establishment hated him. They hated Donald Trump because Donald Trump in the primary debates was willing to call out other Republicans right in front of the camera and not pull any punches. And he also had the mean tweets, which Republicans used to generally think of themselves as, civil and, posh or whatever, and wouldn't call somebody out on Twitter, if you know what I mean. But Donald Trump was and is completely the opposite. So the Republican establishment hated this dude, and a lot of religious people were saying we can't support President Trump because he's flip-flopped on abortion and he's so brash and all these other things. And so, like, I'll give you another example from Ben Shapiro. I've just, of all the conservative political commentators, I watch Ben Shapiro the most because he's just upfront, usually. He doesn't try and, what shall I say, sugarcoat his opinions. He'll just come out and say it. Except now with Stop the Steal, he's still hiding about that. Anyways, Ben Shapiro was very, very lukewarm about even voting for Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton because of all this stuff about Donald Trump. His brashness, his history of sexual assault, his flip-flopping on abortion, kind of that, posh person or that religious person were having problems voting for Trump in the general. All those people in the Republican Party. And so Trump's essentially choice of Vice President Mike Pence changed everything for him, because now that posh person or that religious person had Mike Pence, the VP, to vote for. And the VP almost always becomes the president after that president gets their 2 terms, or their 1 and decides not to run again. So essentially, Trump wanted someone loyal, and the anti-Trump Republicans wanted someone upstanding and religious and the normal conservative Republican. And both sides got what they wanted when he got Mike Pence and put him as his VP. So that united the 2 factions of the Republican Party at that point. The more culturally insensitive and slightly economically left Trump wing, and the, more culturally sensitive but more culturally conservative and more culturally more economically right wing Mike Pence side of the Republican Party. That was how they became united to defeat Hillary Clinton in 2016. And now, fast forward to now, Donald Trump publicly comes out and says Mike Pence is, Mike Pence bad, basically. And a bunch of other Republicans are saying Donald Trump bad. The division has resurfaced. It's officially over, the symbiotic relationship with the two sides of the Republican Party. So I just thought it was important to highlight the significance of this. He's not just denouncing Mike Pence here. He's, starting a war with that entire wing of the party that Mike Pence represents. And that, exactly that Mike Pence represents. So what's the effect of this? Well, in 2024, you're going to see this same civil war between the Donald Trump wing and the Mike Pence wing. Should we be mean on Twitter? Should we not be mean on Twitter? Should we embrace stop the steal and inciting violence, or should we not? Should we um, do tariffs or not do tariffs? Um, all that type of thing. That's what's going to happen here. And in the primary in 2024, they'll probably still have different people debating about stop the steal. There'll probably be some Republican candidates like Donald Trump should have conceded a little bit earlier, and some that are just full stop the steal still. All right. So, Capitol riot, Trump turns on Pence, a bunch of people turn on Trump, Republican Civil War, and then Trump saying essentially the rats abandoning the ship comes out and tries to, save face as much as he can, and he comes out against the violence, but says the election was still stolen, and then a while later he comes out and actually concedes. So I'll show that here.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack on the United States Capitol. Like all Americans, I am outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem. I immediately deployed the National Guard and federal law enforcement to secure the building and expel the intruders. America is and must always be a nation of law and order. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defiled the seat of American democracy. To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. And to those who broke the law, you will pay. We have just been through an intense election and emotions are high, but now tempers must be cooled and calm restored. We must get on with the business of America. My campaign vigorously pursued every legal avenue to contest the election results. My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote. In so doing, I was fighting to defend American democracy. I continue to strongly believe that we must reform our election laws to verify the identity and eligibility of all voters and to ensure faith and confidence in all future elections. Now Congress has certified the results. A new administration will be inaugurated on January 20th. My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power. This moment calls for healing and reconciliation. 2020 has been a challenging time for our people. A menacing pandemic has upended the lives of our citizens, isolated millions in their homes, damaged our economy, and claimed countless lives. Defeating this pandemic and rebuilding the greatest economy on earth will require all of us working together. It will require a renewed emphasis on the civic values of patriotism, faith, charity, community, and family. We must revitalize the sacred bonds of love and loyalty that bind us together as one national family. To the citizens of our country, serving as your president has been the honor of my lifetime. And to all of my wonderful supporters, I know you are disappointed, but I also want you to know that our incredible journey is only just beginning. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
So there's the video. Seems like he concedes. Well, first of all, that was like a speech obviously written by one of Donald Trump's aides. He did not write that speech. He had nothing to do with it. Probably people in his administration were like, okay, we're invoking the 25th Amendment, or you're giving this speech. And he was like, all right, I'll give the speech. I don't know about that. I'm just theorizing, but it wouldn't surprise me. So Donald Trump, trying to save face, comes out, says violence is bad, even concedes. We'll see if that concession holds. And he may even run in 2024. I guess we'll see. But okay, good. This is actually very ironic because the people storming the Capitol were trying to get Donald Trump to overturn the election and be in office the next presidential term. But by doing what they did, they forced him to concede. Very ironic. Very, very ironic. Um, and I heard this on another news channel. It's not my idea, but uh, Trump and the Republicans are kind of a toxic relationship because Republicans, they're very conservative on economics and social issues, and you know, may even do an illegal war against international law. But they do generally care about law and order and the rule of law inside the U.S. But Donald Trump, he's kind of just like, F it, I'm gonna do whatever, and that ends up getting him to do some crazy things and his supporters to do some crazy things. Uh, like 2 days ago when they stormed the Capitol. And so when something crazy like this happens, Donald Trump is just, creating chaos, and Republicans are like, what the heck, we're leaving now. We're denouncing Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump will be like, no, it's not like that. It'll be better now. Kind of like that toxic relationship that just when you get to the brink of, separating, they're like, no, it'll be better now. I view that as the same as Donald Trump doing this speech. He causes chaos. Republicans are like, all right, it's finally time to separate with this guy. And then he's like, no, it's okay. I can see now. And they'll probably not split as hard as they would have otherwise. There's still going to be that split, that civil war within the Republican Party. No way that this makes it go away at all. But it'll prolong it and cool the tensions of it, is what I'll say about this concession speech. At least in my prediction. I don't know everything. All right. So that's what happened, and that's the political impacts of it for now. And now let's talk about the substance of what people are saying about January 6th. I feel like I can just call it January 6th now. And it's like 9/11. It's just, from now on, if you just say January 6th, everyone knows what you're talking about. You don't have to say when the protesters, the rioters, stormed the Capitol. So on January 6th, what people are saying about the substance of it. Well, everyone except probably some real crazies denounced it. Even Donald Trump. So that's not really something that's debatable. But a lot of people are comparing it to the Black Lives Matter protests and saying, if you were against what happened at the Capitol, but not the Black Lives Matter riots, then you're being a hypocrite. Other people are saying, if the people at the Capitol were Black Lives Matter protesters, the police would have cracked down a hell of a lot harder. And this kind of contributes to the overall conversation that people have about who commits more violence, the left wing or the right wing, and people on both sides want you to think it's the other side, of course. So let's talk about that. On the first claim, which is, if you were against what happened at the Capitol, but not talking about that with, but not against the Black Lives Matter riots, you're being a hypocrite. I'd say the first thing that needs to be pointed out is which one is worse. Okay, like, no one can honestly tell me that the people looting the stores or the people burning some police stations are anywhere near as bad as people breaking into and placing pipe bombs at a pipe bomb at the RNC and breaking into a literal Capitol building, like breaking the windows. Senators and House members literally had to hide for their safety. Like, our most important body of our government is the legislative branch. Like, this is literally the heart of American government, and people broke in the windows, broke in, stole things, got into offices. Some people died. I think 5 people at this point. Senators and House members had to hide for their safety. Like, there is nothing close to this that happened in the Black Lives Matter protests. Probably the closest thing you could say is Chaz, because they set up their like own government in a couple of blocks of Portland, and that was mostly just because the Portland governor was like, I'm not gonna, force these people off and actually take action against them. Which, like, you can think that's good or bad, but people taking control of a couple blocks and not really, like, it's not like they are actually successful in trying to create a separate government. It was mostly people just like with some rainbow color hair, and they were like, this is ours now. And the governor didn't care to crack down, but he could have if he wanted. But he didn't because he thought it wasn't that big a deal. So compare that to now, and it's just January 6th is so much bigger of an event. So of course there's going to be louder denouncing of it if it's a bigger deal. But okay, let's go to the base point, which is if you think violence is wrong from the right wing, you should also think violence is wrong from the left wing. To which I say yes. If there were people that were saying looting is fine, but not like, if there were people that came out against what happened on January 6th and were saying looting is totally fine, that's a hypocrisy. Like, there's no other way to put it. Rioting is more of a gray area because it's not putting, well, it depends. I guess rioting that puts people's lives at danger, then that would be another point of hypocrisy. But what I don't think it's hypocrisy is if you're a person that thinks property damage was justified in the BLM protests. Because property damage is not putting lives or institutions in danger. Property damage is just being a financial nuisance on the government. And I guess property damage, you have to separate it also. There's so much nuance. If you're fine with property damage against private citizens, but not fine with January 6th, yes, I think that's also hypocritical. But, like, for example, the property damage I'm talking about is, like, let's say there's a war that you think is unjust, and for that reason you destroy, by property damage, a tank that's about to go to that war, or more clearly in the BLM protests, if you think like, oh, this police tank, because they do have those, is going to be used to carry out unjust and inhumane government policies, then you can destroy the tank. I think that's fundamentally different than storming the Capitol, because one is about property damage against something that you think will be used in violence, and one is about, like, invading one of our most sacred buildings. What I'm trying to say here is these events aren't comparable, but if someone was like okay with looting or okay with people destroying the property of private citizens and doesn't have anything to say about that, they're like totally fine with it, it would be hypocritical for them to be like January 6th was messed up. Anyways, so there's somewhat of a point there, if like with people on the left being hypocritical, but these things aren't that comparable. January 6th is a much bigger deal. If you think about the history books in 5 decades, what are they going to remember? They're going to say Black Lives Matter protests and some riots, and they're going to say Capitol building insurrection, because that's what it is. That's the difference. And that's the other thing, is there was a lot of rioting with Black Lives Matter, but it at least had the offset of a lot of peaceful protests. What's different about this Stop the Steal thing at the Capitol is there wasn't like a bunch of peaceful protests and then also the Capitol. It was like pretty much the Capitol. And, even a couple other state houses got invaded. Like, there wasn't that 90-10 protesters to rioters or 95-5 type of thing. It was like 50-50 from what it looked like about these people at the Capitol, or even the majority of them being part of this violence. So I just don't think they're that comparable. People are saying we should call the people of the Capitol terrorists. Real quick, let's just re-Google definition of terrorism. So terrorist would be someone that does terrorism. So terrorism is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. So violence, yes. Political aims, yes. Against civilians, I guess it was mostly against the Capitol. And intimidation, it was definitely intimidation. They were trying to intimidate Republicans to contest the election, and Republican representatives are also civilians, I think. So by the textbook definition, those people were terrorists, I guess I would say. Yeah, I mean, personally, I haven't really called them terrorists now because the violence was mostly like property stuff. Obviously, property stuff against our capital. Definitely intimidation. I would say if you call these people terrorists, it's not unreasonable. And if you don't call them terrorists, then fine. But those people at the Capitol, they were using violence, mostly like breaking windows time violence. They were trying to intimidate our representatives, who are civilians, in the pursuit of their political aim of getting Donald Trump to get a second term. So fair enough. Now on the last thing, which is would this have happened with Black Lives Matter protesters? Because first of all, this thing was planned out. This protest was planned out. It was even on Donald Trump's Twitter. Like, he was saying, come to the Capitol, let's be wild. Who, like, it's not my job, so I didn't think of it the way of we need a bunch of security at the Capitol. But I think it's sergeants at arms. Like, I think that's the job description of who this job is. But whoever's in favor of security, what the hell were you doing? Because this rally was planned out. There's obviously this big political event. You know there's going to be protests. Protests get rowdy. You know Donald Trump's going to be firing these people up. How do you not know that you need a bunch of security at the Capitol building? And how is there, even if not that much security, how do you not have security nearby to supplement if you think you need more? It's not the individual people's, the individual like police officers' fault. Even though there were some examples of police officers taking pictures with the people that invaded the Capitol, that's a different thing. It's not really that individual person's fault that they got overrun. It's whoever was planning and like, oh yeah, let's just have like 5 security officers. We'll be fine. No, you aren't going to be fine, and you weren't fine because people got past you easily. They broke in easily. And I think it's obvious that if there were Black Lives Matter protesters, so much more police would have been there. In fact, I think that just the plan of Black Lives Matter protesters being there would warrant, like, they would already have the police decked out like a week before. Like, they would know about it. They'd be quote unquote prepared for it, and I think they would probably carry out some police misconduct against the protesters. But that's not what happened here. The police were unprepared, got overrun, even when the people were inside. Like, it's obvious to me that the reaction to those Stop the Steal protesters is different than Black Lives Matter protesters, let alone a protest that's majority black, like a Black Panther protest or something. Because BLM includes a lot of white people, so like it's not even a yin and yang comparison between Donald Trump's almost completely right Stop the Steal protesters. I think if you think the reactions were going to be the same, you just don't know what you're like. We just live on different planets. Because you saw the Black Lives Matter protests, yeah, there was a lot of rioting, and the police, I think, did too much. Were too prepared is not the right way to say it, because I think they're carrying out police violence, but like they weren't underprepared. If anything, they were being brutal against the BLM protests. But then when you look at this one, they didn't even see it coming, let alone not be brutal towards the protesters. So, yeah, I think that criticism is perfectly warranted. If it was a BLM or Black Panther protest, it would have been a completely different police response. Okay, I almost forgot. There are also a couple other things to talk about here. So, because Donald Trump has done all this crazy stuff, there's two things being proposed now to get him out of office before, a week and a half from now, when he would just leave office naturally. Because, he's still got the nuclear football. He could still do some crazy stuff in the meantime. That's the thought. And the thought is also that if we take him out of office now, even if he hadn't done something in the next week and a half, the repudiation is the word. The repudiation of what he's done by taking him out of office just a week before he'd leave anyway is thought to be a good message to send. So that's sort of the justification. Some other people are saying that taking him out of office right now from the 25th Amendment or impeachment, which are the two things being proposed, that would essentially light up divisions even more and be bad. So there's the two sides of people thinking about this, whether it should happen or not. And the two things explained, the 25th Amendment and impeachment, are as follows. So impeachment, we've already done that one time before, but not convicted in the Senate for Donald Trump. So impeachment, basically, you need to file criminal charges, and the House needs a majority to essentially file the charges against the president, and then the Senate needs 2/3 to convict. And if impeachment goes through, then Donald Trump, depending on how they do it, which they probably would do it this way, almost 100% they're going to do it this way. Impeachment can prevent Donald Trump from running another term in 2024. Sorry, running again for president for another term in 2024. Now, in contrast, the other option is the 25th Amendment. Now, the 25th Amendment is a much more complicated process where Mike Pence, which, was just announced by Donald Trump, and half of Donald Trump's own cabinet needs to say Donald Trump is no longer fit to be president. The 25th Amendment is actually, in this case, meant for people that, are physically or mentally incapable to be president. Like, if they get Alzheimer's or something like that. That's what the 25th Amendment is meant for, but I guess you can stretch its definition, like Donald Trump is, too erratic to be president. I don't know. It's a little bit more of a stretch than impeachment would be. But anyways, you need Mike Pence and the majority of President Trump's cabinet. And then, if Donald Trump contests that, which he would, then you need 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to essentially reaffirm that Donald Trump is out of his office, and Mike Pence would be president in both cases of impeachment and if the 25th Amendment was used. So I don't really know why the 25th Amendment is something being considered, because it's harder, and the 25th Amendment wouldn't prevent Donald Trump from running again. To me, impeachment seems like the better option. I guess other people have their own reasons, and I think it would be great if we could impeach Donald Trump because it would be accountability. And I just think accountability is the right thing to have here. um, okay, there's something I'm missing here. Oh, 25th Amendment also has other parts to it. It's got multiple articles. I could show you them right here. All right, so Section 1. This Section 1 is about if the president dies, then Mike Pence becomes president. Whenever there's a vacancy in the VP, the president shall nominate new VP. Right. So this is when the president themselves can transfer presidential powers to the VP. This is done a lot when like a president is going like to sleep. Essentially, like when you get surgery and you get like that gas and they say count to 10, you fall asleep. If a president is having a surgery where they need to go under, they'll transfer their powers to the VP so that their VP can do stuff while they're in the middle of the surgery. That's what Section 3 is basically for. And then Section 4 is the part that everyone's talking about now, which is how essentially you would need the VP, the majority of the cabinet, and 2/3 of both houses of Congress to do Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, which is just so much harder than impeachment. I really don't know why people would think 25th Amendment instead of impeachment, but there you go. I remembered a little bit after that I wanted to include this too, so thank you for watching. Peace.